Well, Robert Sapolsky is a neuroendocrinologist by profession. His also he had very very compelling work in the field of neurology. He is a biologist too, worked with neurosurgery too for many years. Um, Biological anthropology. He's a prolific writer. And well, I'll save you his CV because it's a huge one. I prefer to give the word to him and have the pleasure to listen to his um, very interesting, controversial work about determinism. I think after Peter, that defended a very libertarian view, will be a big and nice contrast. So, a big round of applause for Robert Sapolsky. Well, feel free to start, Robert.
Okay. Thank you. I'm glad to be here, wherever here is, whatever stratosphere I'm bouncing electrons off of. Let's see, confirm my speaking language. English. Good. I wish I could be there in person, but unfortunately that was not possible. But let me start off with a screen share here.
You're allowed already to, yeah, perfect.
Okay, well, just to start off with a blank slate, as noted, I've got, I think, a very different viewpoint than a lot of the people you were hearing in this conference. I think by any standards, I am considered out in the lunatic fringe, complete extreme view, in that my stance as a neuroscientist is that there is no free will. In fact, that there is no free will whatsoever, and that when you look at the biology of what produces behavior, that seems a completely clear answer to me about the free will debate. Now, I've been thinking this way since I was 14 years old, and throughout it has always occurred to me that, trying to convince people there's no free will. My God, what would happen if people actually started believing that there's no free will? And this has always struck me as a much bigger problem than whether there's free will itself, of what kind of world are we supposed to have? And a lot of my time has been spent thinking about how, if people stopped believing in free will, not only would it not be a disaster, a moral disaster, a societal disaster, but in fact, it would be a great thing. It would be a very liberating, humane thing. So I'm going to try to make that argument. Starting off here, this is a meme that appeared some months ago, and just translating fetus here. Fetus is wishing, please, please let me be born in Norway. Hello, sir, where am I? And what they're told instead is, you're in Mississippi and your mother is 14 years old and who knows who your father is. And the punchline there is, oh, this is a disaster. For those of you who are not familiar with American states, Mississippi is the last state in this country I would want to be born in, live in, die in, have anything to do with. It is the most backward state in the United States. And just to give a useful comparison here with Norway, if you were born in Mississippi, your lifespan is 11 years shorter. You're more likely to die in infancy. Your mother was more likely to die giving birth to you. You're almost 40 times more likely to be murdered. What we see here is a very, very clear, obvious first step, which is from the moment you appear on Earth, luck is playing an enormous role in everything that is going to happen. And the future of this child born in Mississippi versus Norway, born to a 14-year-old mother versus a stable family, all of that is clear. Now, the first point I want to make in going through how, when you look at us, when you look at our behavior, at the end, all there is the biology over which we had no control, and its interactions with environment over which we had no control. And when you put those pieces together, we are nothing more or less than the sum of our luck in that regard. Now, to begin to look at it scientifically, this is not just relevant at the moment you were born, this is relevant much earlier, when you were a fetus. Starting in fetal life, what is your mother's stress hormone levels? Because her stress hormones in her bloodstream will be getting into your brain and affecting the development, the wiring up of your nervous system. Is your mother starving? Is your mother well nourished? Is your mother undernourished? Is your mother consuming too much alcohol, various drugs? With all of these, what we see is fetal environment can cause up to a 20-fold difference in the adult risk of some of these bad neurodevelopmental outcomes. You are not starting environment at the moment you were born. You have just spent 9 very, very intimate months sharing the environment with your mother. And what we see here as the very first step is, wow, nobody asked you which womb you wanted to spend 9 months in. Nobody asked you what sort of fetal environment you wanted. And all we see here is this is a first enormous step, biology with your mother's fetal environment, determining what sort of luck you were going to have in your life. So we move then to the next step, which is your childhood itself. And what science has figured out is that the type of childhood you have matters enormously, what sort of adulthood you have. And, I do not need to tell anyone the enormous range of different childhoods, from very privileged to complete disasters. Every version of this here, from being an 8-year-old child bride, to being homeless, to being the daughter of a major Nazi, to being Joseph Stalin's daughter, starvation, all of those are a happy, stable family, stimulation, all of that. What has been the big question throughout is, how does different childhood experiences make for a different adult? What's the neurobiology of that? And this is this immensely trendy new field of epigenetics. Experience starting in the womb, but especially during childhood. Experience does not change your DNA, does not change your genes, does not change the sequences of them. It has no effect on your genetics. What it affects dramatically is the regulation of your genes, the epigenetics, which genes are active when. And what epigenetics is about early in life is, in some cases, permanently silencing some genes in some parts of your body and some parts of your brain, permanently activating other ones. What this is all about is how your early luck in life is setting you up for gene regulation for your entire life. Let me give you an example of this. Here we have something that a lot of people always find to be surprising, but you can have wonderful luck or terrible luck in being a rat pup in terms of what kind of mother you wind up with. And it turns out there's tremendous differences in rat mothering style, and you can luck out and have a wonderful mother, the world's greatest rat mother. What does she do? She licks you a lot. She grooms you. She carries you around. She interacts with you. Or you can have the worst mother on earth who does none of that. And what people have found, a landmark finding now about 25 years old, is the mothering style of a mother rat causes epigenetic changes in the brain of her child. One particular one, the first one discovered, was an epigenetic change so that if you have a terrible rat mother who is stressed and pays no attention to you and all of that, the epigenetic change in your brain will result when you were an adult, you are going to have an elevated stress response. That is going to set you up for all sorts of diseases. That is going to set you up for a shorter life expectancy, more decline of cognition when you get old, all sorts of realms of that, impaired learning during stress. And probably the most interesting thing here for our purposes, have a rat mother who is stressed as an adult because of epigenetics, you will have elevated levels of stress hormones. And when you get pregnant, your own fetus will be exposed to higher stress hormone levels and will have the same epigenetic effect, and it will transfer over the generations. So, epigenetics setting you up for lifelong, potentially multi-generational effects on how life is going to turn out to be for you. What your mothering style was affecting the neurobiology of what your old age is going to be like and everything in between. Next factor that comes into childhood, what kind of culture you were born into. And if you do cross-cultural anthropology, sociology, psychology, any of those, you will know that 90% of the literature is comparing what are called collectivist cultures, most famously in Southeast Asia, rice farmers, rice paddies, things of that sort, and individualist cultures, and what they always study is the United States, which has the most extreme individualist culture on earth. And what you see is tremendous differences in child rearing, tremendous differences in every aspect of life. What is most striking is those tremendous differences are there within minutes after you were born. Depending on whether your mother was raised in a collectivist culture or an individualist culture, how loudly she will be singing lullabies to you on the average will vary. Individualist cultures' mothers sing more loudly to their babies. How much time you spend in contact with your mother. When you begin to cry, on the average, how many seconds pass before your mother picks you up? If you're in a collectivist culture, it is much faster than in an individualist culture on the average. When do you first sleep in a bed alone rather than next to your mother? At what age are you weaned? In other words, within minutes of birth, the culture your ancestors came up with centuries ago is going to be influencing how your brain is wiring up. And what you see, where these cultural differences come from, reflect different ecosystems, all sorts of fascinating versions of that. If you live in a rainforest, you are more likely to invent a religion with lots of gods. If you live in the desert, you are more likely to invent a monotheistic religion. So all of these things happening centuries ago and minutes after you were born, that is already influencing the type of brain you were wiring up. Also, what's going on as a child is your family environment, the stability of that. People in the US and child development have this tremendous emphasis these days on adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, and you can get an ACE score. An ACE score going from 0 to 10. 0, you have had the luckiest life possible in the entire world, or you get an ACE score of 1, 2, 3, up to 10. Were you physically abused as a child? Were you emotionally abused? Were you neglected emotionally? Was a family member mentally ill, in jail, addicted to a drug? All of that, and getting a score from the incredibly lucky 0 up to the unthinkably bad 10. And what you see is, for every step higher in your ACE score, you're about 35% more likely to wind up in jail. You're about 35% more likely, if you are a girl, to have a pregnancy when you were still a teenager. About 35% more likely to be addicted to a drug, to have a depressive disorder, to have an anxiety disorder, and you sure did not pick which family you wound up with. And all of this is part of how you were wiring up your brain. Of course, early development, genes are relevant also. And here's one of the most striking findings in the literature. There's this one gene, for those of you who care about such things, it's called MAO alpha, monoamine oxidase alpha. It has something to do with serotonin in your brain. And scientists found that there's two different versions of the MAO alpha gene, and a lot of studies of rats, of mice, of monkeys showed that there was a good version of the MAO alpha gene and a bad version. What's the bad version about? If you were a rat with the bad version, you were more likely to be aggressive. You were more likely to be involved in fights. You were more likely to be aggressive for no reason, spontaneously, all of that. Same thing in monkeys. And at that point, everyone said, oh my God, so what about humans? Because we've got the same gene and it comes in two different versions. And a classic study carried out by Avlasham Caspi at Duke University in the United States, looking at thousands of children from birth into adulthood and looking at their genetics and asking a very simple question. If you had the bad version of the MAO alpha gene, were you more likely by the time you were a young adult to have a history of violence? And the answer was yes, absolutely, if and only if you were abused as a child. If you had no history of childhood abuse, which gene version you had made no difference at all. And as you look at a more severe abusive childhood environment, the more the gene you had makes a difference. Does this gene cause aggression? Absolutely not. Does childhood maltreatment cause aggression? Absolutely not. But combine the two of them together and you get an enormous effect there. So what kind of childhood, what kind of genes, what kind of epigenetic effects, what kind of that, and what kind of adult you are going to be, what kind of brain you will have at that point. Next, adolescence. And in this one figure here, I present everything you need to know about the adolescent brain as follows. One part of the brain, the nucleus accumbens, it's related to the neurotransmitter dopamine. It has to do with reward and pleasure and anticipation and novelty seeking and sensation seeking and all of that. And what you see is by the time you are about 12 years old, you almost have your adult nucleus accumbens working there. It is almost fully mature at that point. By the time you're about 12 years old, pleasure, reward, motivation, novelty, impulse, all of that is already running at almost adult levels. Meanwhile, you have, for my money, the most interesting part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex. What does it do? Self-discipline, long-term planning, gratification postponement, impulse control, emotional regulation, and we see here the incredibly important fact that the prefrontal cortex does not fully mature until you are about 25 years old. It is the last part of the brain to mature. And what do we see here? By the time you're 15 years old, you were all about impulse and reward and pleasure and novelty and sensation, while your prefrontal cortex is nowhere near functioning yet. And the prefrontal cortex's job would normally be to say to you as an adult, don't do that, you are going to regret it. Have some impulse control. And what we explain here is this is why teenagers act like teenagers. What's the consequence for our adult brains? This is the last time in life where you have a big opportunity for environment and experience to construct your prefrontal cortex into your adult version. And everything we see here, stress, stimulation, fear, mental illness, all of these sorts of things are influencing the development of your prefrontal cortex. So you didn't choose your womb, you didn't choose your childhood, you didn't choose what sort of neighborhood you lived in as a teenager. It just progresses from there. Now, here we have examples by the time you were an adult. What has your life turned out to be like? Do you have terrible luck? Do you have trauma? Were you in combat and traumatized, or a sexual assault and traumatized? Do you have post-traumatic stress disorder? Are you addicted to a drug? Do you have a long history of major depression? Are you living in poverty? Do you have an anxiety disorder? All of these are associated with atrophy of one part of the brain, the hippocampus, which has to do with learning and memory, atrophy of the prefrontal cortex, expansion of the amygdala. And in these cases, this is not subtle. This is not, ooh, you need to like dissect out a brain and look at one neuron at a time. On brain imaging, the structure, the size of different parts of your brain will respond to these sorts of traumas and will give you a brain that is more prone to depression, more prone to anxiety, more learning problems, all of that. Or at the opposite end is your adulthood full of a stimulating environment, exercise, a sense of control, stimulation. Are you learning a foreign language? Are you learning a musical instrument? Have you found love? Have you found God? And all of those things are associated with a hippocampus that functions better, a prefrontal cortex that functions better, an amygdala that is smaller, that is less reactive. All of this sitting there with, so what have your last 20 years been like? What has it been like, all these things you had no control over? But we push further. Now, instead of fetal life, childhood, adolescence, what happened to you 5 years ago, now the issue is, what was happening to you today? What was happening to you in the last 12 hours in terms of your hormone levels? And here are two really interesting demonstrations about how hormones over the course of hours are going to have an enormous impact on how we view people making decisions filled with free will. Here's a first example. I love this study. This is one of the most interesting studies on earth, and it has to do with the hormone oxytocin. Lots of you will know about oxytocin. Oxytocin promotes bonding between mothers and infants. It promotes bonding between females and males and monogamous species. It makes you more trusting. It makes you more emotionally expressive. It makes you more generous. Oxytocin is wonderful. It would be great if we just poured oxytocin into the water supply for everyone on Earth. It would be the Garden of Eden. No. Oxytocin does not make you pro-social. It makes you pro-social only some of the time. And this was this brilliant study. It was carried out in the Netherlands. Classic problem in philosophy. I'm sure most of you are aware of this one, the runaway trolley problem. A train has broken loose of the tracks. It's going to kill these 5 innocent people. Do you pull a lever in order to divert it, to kill 1 person in order to save 5? Can you do that? Classic and utilitarian philosophy, all sorts of studies showing the way you describe the question alters what people's decisions are, all of that. So here's what was done in this study. So they had university students in the Netherlands deciding, do you pull the lever and send the trolley and kill this person? And what they did in this study was they gave this person a name. Either they had a typical name for someone from the Netherlands, Dirk, Peter, something like that, some good old familiar person, Dutch person. Or they gave them the name from one of the 2 groups that people in the Netherlands have the most automatic implicit negative feelings about. Germans, oh, that's right, World War II, or people with Muslim names. So you're sitting there with your subjects and you're saying, okay, you're going to pull the lever and kill Dirk, kill Mahmoud, kill Otto. Has no effect. The person's name has no effect unless you give them oxytocin. And what you see is oxytocin, they are never going to kill Dirk. They are going to say, I can't do it. It's okay to kill 5 people. And if you have Otto or Wolfgang or Mahmoud or Ahmed or something, people are jumping out of their chairs to kill the person and divert the trolley. Oh, what's going on here? What is oxytocin doing? Does it make you more pro-social? No. It only makes you more pro-social to someone who already counts as an us, a member of my tribe. For somebody in an out group, a them, someone from a different tribe, what oxytocin does is make you more aggressive and less generous and all of that. So you're sitting there making a major, major philosophical decision, one life and death, and the levels of some hormones that were in your bloodstream this morning have something to do with the decision you were going to make? Yeah, it does. Next example of hormones. So you're male or you're female. What were your testosterone levels like this morning? Females have testosterone in their bloodstream or related hormones, androgen-like hormones. Males do as well, obviously much higher levels. And what does elevated levels of testosterone in your bloodstream do? You look at a face with a neutral expression, and most people will say, oh, that's a neutral face. It's not happy, it's not sad, it's whatever, it's neutral. If your testosterone levels are elevated, you are more likely to say, this is a threatening face. This looks like somebody who is angry, who is aggressive, who is threatening me. If you're sitting there and you're just going about your business, you're looking at this face, if your testosterone levels are elevated, your amygdala is more likely to activate in response to seeing this face. You're sitting there and this is occurring in under 1 second. What is testosterone doing? It is influencing how you are interpreting the world around you. This hormone is determining whether or not you see threat, whether or not you see the world as a neutral place, a threatening. All of this going on in the hours before you have to make a life and death decision. So, hormones are relevant in those hours. What's also relevant is in the minutes before you have to make this decision. So you have to decide, are you going to pull a trigger? Are you going to rob a bank? Are you going to do something wonderful, generous? Are you going to do something selfish and violent? And what we've been seeing is, it depends. What was your life like when you were a fetus? How was your childhood? What about your adolescence? What about the recent decades? What about this morning's hormone levels? What we see here is what was going on in your world in the minutes before you had to make this decision. And here is one classic study. Probably a lot of you have heard about this. This is already famous, notorious. This was published in a very prestigious journal some years ago. And this was looking at judges in a parole court where they decide either this prisoner is allowed to go free or this prisoner goes back to jail. And they studied all of the judges in this country working in this system, every single judicial decision that they made, and looked at what's the predictor of whether or not the judge let the person go free or sent them back to jail. And the single biggest predictor was how many hours it had been since the judge had eaten a meal. If you appeared in front of the judge right after they had a nice lunch, you had about a 60% chance of being able to go home free. By 3 hours later, 0% chance. Oh my God, this is crazy. What is this about? We understand the biology of this. This has to do with blood glucose levels. If it has been hours since you have eaten, your blood glucose levels are lower, and a very simple fact, your brain is expensive. Your brain demands a lot of energy. Your brain is 3% of your body weight. It uses 25% of your glucose and oxygen. And what's the most expensive part of your brain? The prefrontal cortex. Its job is to sit there and say, wait a second, don't do the easy thing and just send the guy back to jail. Really look at this guy, think about him, think about how his life has been different from yours, all of that. And if your prefrontal cortex is hungry and not working very well, you do the easier thing. You say, send the guy back to jail. This study has been challenged by some along statistical lines. In my opinion, the original authors have completely answered those complaints. The study has been replicated. And if you were ever going into a bank and you were asking for a loan, go in right after the bank officer has had lunch. Because if you go in 3 hours later, a very significantly different chance that they will say, sure, here is some money. The exact same effect. So what's going on in your bloodstream? Have you just eaten? Do you have a stomach ache? Any of that? Here's another example of what's going on within seconds. Here is one of the most depressing findings out there in the whole world if you were a neuroscientist. Sit someone down and put them in a brain scanner. And these are studies done in the United States. And what you're doing is flashing up pictures of different faces. And what you see is if the person in the brain scanner is white, if you flash up the face of someone who is black, in 75% of subjects, the amygdala will activate. The amygdala about fear, anxiety, aggression. Oh yeah, because the person is sitting there and they understand society, prejudices. No, the amygdala is doing this in 60 to 70 thousandths of a second. It is doing it before the person is even consciously aware of what they are looking at. In a fraction of a second before you even know what you are looking at, your amygdala is running with its prejudices. Oh my God, this is so depressing. This has been replicated over and over. A really interesting thing is, what about the 25% of people that does not happen in? These are people who tended to grow up in neighborhoods that were racially mixed, things of that sort. But nevertheless, my God, 75% of people in under a tenth of a second. This is depressing. There's no hope for us as humans whatsoever. It is guaranteed that we are racist. It is not guaranteed that we are racist. Now you do the study in a different way. If any of you are oriented towards American baseball, I live in San Francisco, which is where Stanford is near, and we have a San Francisco baseball team, the San Francisco Giants, and their worst rivals on the entire planet is the baseball team from Los Angeles, the Los Angeles Dodgers. Take somebody who lives in San Francisco, who has been born there. They have worshiped this baseball team since they were 2 weeks old. It's the most, and they hate this team. What's it? And put them in a brain scanner and flash up pictures of faces. And now each face is wearing a baseball cap, either of your home team or the hated enemy team. And what you see is your amygdala does not pay any attention to what the person's skin color is. All it's looking at now is the baseball caps. And if it's this baseball cap in 60 to 70 thousandth of a second, the amygdala is going to activate. Oh my God, we are innately determined to be racist. That's ridiculous. Baseball has existed for, 100, 200 years, and all you need to do is do this cultural manipulation, and your brain doesn't care about skin color anymore. It's worrying about a completely different version of tribe. And what you see is you could change how people's amygdalas will react to all sorts of people who count as thems, as members of outgroups, if you show them pictures of a them who is popular. Someone who is popular, who's Jewish, who's Latino, who is Black, lesbian, Asian American, Muslim American, transgender, gay. And what you see in all of these cases is the amygdala doesn't react because unconsciously, this one's a good Jew. This one is a good lesbian. This one is a good transgender individual. They count as an honorary us. And what you see is, within a fraction of a second, that's determining how your brain is reacting. All of this going on from the moment you were a fetus to up to 1 second ago to one fraction of a second ago. Okay, so you look at all of this, and the easy conclusion is, why does somebody do what they just did? Because of the neurobiology of 1 second ago, the environmental stimuli of 1 hour ago, the endocrinology of a day ago, all the way back to fetal life. Ooh, all of these different disciplines are relevant. The key point is, when you really study how these things work, they all turn into one discipline. For example, you were interested in what genes have to do with behavior. By definition, if you were talking about genes, you were talking about millions of years of evolution when you evolved those genes. So suddenly, you need to talk to evolutionary biologists, paleontologists, all of that is relevant. If you were talking about genes and behavior, by definition, you were talking about fetal life and the epigenetic effects. If you were talking about genes and behavior, you were talking about what you had for breakfast today and how much this gene was active making this or that protein in your brain 20 minutes ago. When you look at all of these influences, evolution up to 1 second ago all turns into one single discipline, one seamless arc. And when you look at that arc, and when you look at how these pieces meld together, there is not a crack anywhere there in which you could squeeze in free will. That's the conclusion that I reach. Nonetheless, despite that, the vast majority of people would instantly disagree with me. A lot of the speakers at this conference will immediately disagree with me. What they are instead are philosophical compatibilists. They're willing to say, yes, the world is made of atoms, we have cells, we have biology, all of that, but somehow that is compatible with us still having free will. All of the science that I just went through somehow is still compatible. And what the surveys show is about 90% of philosophers consider themselves to be philosophical compatibilists. So why is that such a strong response in the face of the science we have been living, we have been learning? And I think it is for two reasons. The first one, you have a circumstance where you make a choice. You're sitting there and you have to choose, what kind of ice cream do I want? Am I going to shoot this person and kill them? I have to make a decision. I have to form an intent at this point, and then I act on it. You are consciously aware of what your intent is. You know that if you do that, if you pick this ice cream cone, you're probably going to get this ice cream cone. If you shoot the person, they are probably not going to be happy. Most importantly, you know you have choices. You could pick any of these ice cream cones. You don't have to shoot the person. And for most people, this is necessary and sufficient to decide that you have seen free will. In the American legal system, if somebody has committed a criminal act, if they were consciously aware of that intent, if they knew what the outcome was likely to be, if they knew they did not have to do that, that's it. They're guilty. They exercised free will. That's all you need to know. And for my purposes, all of this stuff up here is totally boring and completely irrelevant, because it does not ask the only question you can ask, which is, so how did you turn out to be the kind of person who would form that intent? Asking what went on here without asking what went on here is like somebody asks you, what do you think of this book? And all you have done is you have read the last paragraph of that book, and you have an opinion. And everything that has gone on from 1 second before to back to your genes, to back to culture, to back to evolution, all of that has made you into the person you are who would form that intent at that moment. And all of this is the realm where you had no control over what came out. And what you see there is, no matter how hard you try, you cannot intend to do something different from what you intend to do. You cannot wish for something different than what you wish for. You cannot decide what you are going to think of next. You cannot decide you want to have more willpower successfully. In all of these cases, yes, you could make a choice in that moment. There are multiple possible futures at that moment, but you cannot intend to do something different than what you wound up intending to do. And what you wound up intending to do, wishing for, thinking, the willpower that you have is nothing more or less than the outcome of 1 second ago, 1 hour ago, 1 lifetime ago. So I think people cling on to this version of free will because in the moment you were making a choice, it just feels so real, it feels so in your face in the moment, that it's impossible to imagine that that's irrelevant. Just how did I become the sort of person I am in this instant? So I think that's one of the ways in which people wind up getting pulled into, yes, 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 there is free will, when there really isn't. Here's the second way. When you get an example of someone who is a special case, someone who has had horrible luck, but somehow they pull themselves out of their circumstances. They do something amazing. This is Mario Capecchi. He got the Nobel Prize in molecular biology. For those of you who care about such things, he discovered site-directed mutagenesis. And when he was a child, he was a homeless street kid in Italy during World War II. And somehow he wound up doing this. In 1960, the fastest woman runner in the world was this American woman named Wilma Rudolph, and she had polio as a child and was crippled and decided, I am going to walk. And once she fought through the pain and was able to walk, she decided, I'm going to run. And before it was over with, she was the fastest runner on earth. Oh my God, how did she do that? Or you get somebody who picks up with the hell that's been going on in Venezuela and they want a better life for their child and they walk all the way to the United States. And you look at any of these people and that's where we're tempted to see free will, because we see tenacity. We see self-discipline, we see motivation, we see all of that stuff, and it just feels like we're looking at free will. Or you can see the opposite. You can see somebody who is born into wealth, who has good fortune, who has a great brain, and they waste it. They throw it away. In the United States, 70% of wealthy families, rich families, by the second generation, they have lost their money because they give rise to kids who are stupid and crazy and waste all of their money with crazy schemes or drugs or stupid stuff. So we look at someone born in poverty and somehow they turn out great, or someone born in wealth and somehow they throw it all away. We look at that and again, we think we are looking at free will. For a very simple reason, we are making a false dichotomy. On the left here is all sorts of things that all of us know is made of biology. You had no control over how tall you are, what eye color you have. What we know biologically, you had no control if you're being a pedophile. You had no control if you were a natural runner, if you were smart or not, if you have the genetics of alcoholism, if you were attractive. Yeah, all of these things you were handed, you have no control over. And where people then decide they are seeing free will is on the right. These are the things you are handed, but what do you do with them? Are you a pedophile? But do you fight the urge to act on it? Are you a runner? Do you fight through the pain? Are you not that smart, but you study hard? Are you prone towards alcoholism, but you're able to always order something that is not an alcoholic drink? Ooh, this is made of biology, and this is made of Sunday morning sermons in church. This is made of your soul. This is made of your character, all of that. And the critical point is, the stuff on the right is made of the exact same biology as the stuff on the left, because the stuff on the right is all about your prefrontal cortex. How good are you at resisting urges? How good are you at studying hard when all of your friends are going to a party? How good are you in all of these cases? And what we saw was, starting with your fetal life, your luck, the biology and the environment over which you had no control, is already shaping what kind of prefrontal cortex you are going to have. By the time a child is 2 months old, if their mother is poor, already on the average, their prefrontal cortex development is already slowed down. This is not made out of, do you have a good soul or not? This is made of the exact same biology as this, but then we have this huge temptation that when we look at stuff like this, to say, we're seeing free will. Okay, so from my standpoint, these are the two ways in which people can look at the neuroscience and they still fall for free will, because they say, I just chose what flavor ice cream. I just exercised my free will. How did you become that person? Or, I've just looked at a totally inspiring case, free will discipline that they showed, and not being able to accept that this is made of the exact same biology as this stuff is. So within that, I think these are the two responses to the ways in which people hold on to free will belief. And what you see, though, is when you try to convince somebody that there's no free will, they immediately panic in most cases, and they keep saying the same thing, which is, I don't know any neurobiology, maybe there isn't free will, but do not tell people there is no free will, because things will go terribly, because there will be all sorts of problems. The first problem is you will have a terrible challenge working through what all of this means. If you really truly believe there is no free will, it never makes any sense to decide that there is a moral virtue to blaming anyone for anything, for praising anyone, for feeling as if you have earned anything, you are entitled to anything, you deserve anything, anyone else deserves anything. If you truly do not believe in free will, it makes no sense to ever hate anyone for what they've done, because hating a person is like hating an earthquake. It's like hating a volcano. It makes no sense at all. So the first challenge for people is, oh my God, what kind of world are you expecting to have if these are the conclusions it leads you to? And the worry that they always go to at that point is, oh no, if people stop believing in free will, they're going to run amok. They're just going to break laws. They're going to run around like crazy, selfish people. There's going to be criminals everywhere, because people will say, don't hold me responsible. I had nothing to do with it. And there is by now, I think, a very convincing literature showing that if you have people who for a long time have thought there is no free will, They are exactly as moral and ethical in their behavior as people who believe very strongly in free will. And there are some very interesting explanations for that. The next thing people then always begin to worry about is, oh no, you're saying there's no free will, everything is determined, nothing can ever change. Don't bother. And this is completely wrong. This is confusing, 15th century Christian predeterminism with scientific determinism. Things change. People change. The critical thing, though, is to recognize you do not choose to change. You were changed by experience as a function of the person you became when you experienced that experience. Let me give you an example. Two people go and watch a movie. It's some inspirational movie about some heroic individual or whatever, and one person comes out of the movie, the first person comes out, and they are changed by their experience. They make a decision at that point. They say, wow, that was such an inspirational movie that right now I am going to spend the rest of my life, I'm going to give away all of my possessions and help the poor. The second person comes out of the movie changed by the experience. They make a decision. They say, wow, starting tomorrow, I am going to study with the director of that film for the rest of my life because they are the best film director I've ever seen. Yeah, they were both changed by circumstance in dramatically different ways as a function of they were two very different people going into that. Yes, change can happen as long as you recognize how it works. Next worry that people say is, oh my God, you're just going to have criminals running around in the streets. And that's nonsense. That's crazy. You have to protect people, society, from dangerous individuals, of course, but you can do it without invoking free will. A car, you have an automobile whose brakes are not working. It's dangerous. It cannot be out on the street. Do you preach to it? Do you tell it about its terrible soul? No, you lock it up in the back of your house and you do not drive it. But you do not go out every morning with a large hammer and hit the car over the top there as punishment for its having its brakes not work. You just make sure society is safe. And you have all sorts of systems, all sorts of theorists these days with criminology where they are looking at systems of quarantine. Exactly like you have quarantine in public health systems. You quarantine the individual. You make sure they cannot harm anyone, but you don't constrain them 1 inch more than that. And you don't preach to them about their terrible soul. And you do research about root causes and how they became that sort of person and how we can keep more people in society from turning into that sort of person. Oh my God, that sounds crazy. We do it all the time. You have a 5-year-old child and they have a nose cold. They are sneezing. What is the law? What's the rule we have in the United States? Do not send them to school tomorrow because they're going to sneeze all over the other kids and they're going to get everyone sick. Keep them home. Quarantine them. And you quarantine them because they're dangerous. They could get all the other kids sick. You quarantine them, but you do not say to them, oh, you are a rotten, horrible child because you were sneezing. You cannot play with your toys today. You constrain them and the absolute minimum and nothing more than that. And you go figure out what causes colds. You have an airplane pilot who has an allergy and he's got all congested and he takes a medication, an antihistamine. And an antihistamine makes you sleepy. And it's dangerous for you to be a pilot then. And there's a quarantine rule. If you're taking antihistamines, you cannot fly a plane for 3 days afterward. Not because you're evil, but you've protected society from that as well without telling the person, oh my God, you were sleeping with Satan. That's why you were having, your allergy problems. That's ridiculous. But 200 years ago, people thought illness was a sign that God was judging you badly. No, we figured out having a sneezing nose cold has nothing to do with free will. And we figured out how to protect society from that sort of danger. And we can do that again and again in all sorts of other realms. Finally, the other worry is, oh my God, if there's no free will, you're going to have no meritocracies. You're going to have no elites. Oh my God, you have a brain tumor and they're just going to pick somebody at random to be the brain surgeon. No, you can protect society from having people who are not competent doing difficult things. But what you have to do is design it in a way where you understand why it is in the United States, for example, that the wealthiest 1% of the population has 40% of the wealth. When you look at who goes to Harvard University in the United States, the majority of them come from the top 3% of wage earners. When you see all of these versions of unequal opportunity, you got to go and fix that also, but that is fixable. Okay, in all of these realms, what you see is the things that people worry about the most when you say, oh, look at all this science, this neurobiology and genetics and anthropology and all of that, and it shows there's no free will. You don't have to worry about this stuff if people start believing it. The single most important thing, the point that I want to end with, is not only do you not have to worry, it's a wonderful thing when you get rid of belief in free will. Because every time we have done that throughout history, it has become a better world. 400 years ago, if there was a terrible storm that destroyed everybody's crops and all, why did that happen? You knew why it happened. Some old woman who is a witch made some potion and witchcraft and caused the storm to happen. And what was the medical treatment for somebody who is a witch? You burned her at the stake. And somewhere along the way, we figured out, oh, you don't have free will. You can't control the weather. It doesn't work that way. And it's a very good thing that we don't burn old ladies at the stake anymore. Somewhere around 200 years ago, people figured out that if you have epilepsy, if you have an epileptic seizure, that doesn't mean that you are cooperating with Satan, that you are in league with the devil, which is what people thought for 1,000 years before that, and you would be burned at the stake. About 200 years ago, the first neurologists figured out, oh, it's a brain disease. It's a brain disease, and it's a very good thing also that we now have a world, the westernized world, where if you have a seizure, it's a neurological disease. It's not a sign that you are some kind of witch or devil. That's great. Somewhere in the last 60 years or so, people figured out schizophrenia is not caused by mothers who have some Freudian psychodynamic hatred of their child. People figured out, no, it's a neurogenetic disorder, and suddenly hundreds of thousands of mothers of people with schizophrenia were told, you know what? It wasn't actually your fault. You did not control that. There was no free will. You did not make your child schizophrenic. And it is amazing when you talk to, there's an organization in the United States of mothers of people with schizophrenia, and the founders of that organization are now 90-year-old women. I've gotten to talk to some of them, and they were the ones when they were 30 years old, they were told, you caused your child schizophrenia. You had the power to do that. And at age 90, they still want to kill those doctors, those psychiatrists. The world has become a much more humane place when we figured out mothers do not cause schizophrenia. Mothers do not cause autism. Laziness is not what causes learning problems. It's called dyslexia. And at every one of these steps, we have figured out how to subtract free will out of the picture. And at every one of these points, not only does the world not go crazy, it becomes a better place. So from my stance, not only is there no free will, not only do all of the philosophical arguments for why there is free will fall apart, but it would be a great thing if people stopped believing in free will, because it would be a much, much more humane world. Okay, so let me stop at that point and thank you for your attention.
Well, that was absolutely terrific. Thanks a lot. Questions, Peter? Okay, Peter. Well, actually, Nietzsche has this in the genealogy of morals. He has this expression, natural antipode. I think Peter is the natural antipode of Sapolsky. So let's see how this debate will run.
Hi, we actually met 20 years ago because Laura Ampetito invited you to Dartmouth, and we met.
Yes, I remember.
Maybe our views have diverged since that common meeting.
I don't know. I think they were pretty different even then, but good to see you.
Good to see you. Where to start? So had you called your book Not Determined but Influenced, I would completely agree with everything you're saying, because surely SES and surely alcohol drinking by their mother has a huge effect on our outcomes. But the question is whether we're determined or not. Are we so influenced as to have no say whatsoever in the matter of what becomes of us? I mean, on your view, would there be no distinction? I'll ask a series of questions. On your view, would there be no distinction between, say, volitional eye movements, saccades, and pupillary dynamics, which are not volitional? Well, in the former case, where I choose to look is for reasons, right? If I'm hungry, I'll look for restaurants. But if it's Sabbath, I won't do that. Whereas for non-volitional eye movements, I have no say in the matter. So there seems to be a difference between volitional processes and non-volitional processes. So that's one line of questioning. Another is, you can have people who are genetically identical, like monozygotic twins, raised in the same family, so they're as close to the same environment as possible, not identical, but one will end up with schizophrenia, another not. Their pores will be in different places, their hair follicles will be in different places, so the genetics is certainly not sufficient to give a deterministic outcome. And then, in addition to the environment, the external environment, there's the internal environment, right? So two genetically identical people, twins, one might end up being a pianist and the other might end up, becoming a dentist. I mean, they can be very different. And I would say that in addition to the external environment, there's the internal environment of their own imagination and the things that they play out, and that has some influence on what they then become. Of course, they can't grow wings, right? Because that's not part of their genetic potential. But what is genetically given is a potential, and how that potential is realized is in part realized by environmental factors that are not external in the world, but internal, how we plan our own lives. I mean, take your life, right? Do you think that it was inevitable since the Big Bang that you would have worked with baboons in Kenya, as opposed to, something else? Or was there some play in the matter? Did your own internal imaginings lead to you living the life that you did? And if that's the case, I would say that you played some role in the matter of what became of you. All right, I'll stop there.
Okay, well, wonderful. I see you and I could have happy discussions for hours and hours disagreeing. Let's see, to first hit, I'm seeing 3 points there. The first one is, the negotiation. Why can't we all be reasonable people and just say there's influences? Instead of this crazy extreme, there's no free will whatsoever. Can't we all get along and have a peaceful world and just admit that it's influences? Well, for one thing, I am perfectly happy if I convince people that there is far less free will than they think there is, rather than convincing them that there's none whatsoever, because I think even that is going to have some important effects. But on the scientific level, I would love if the answer was there's influences. I love thinking in continua. Everything in biology comes in a continua. And yet here I find myself sitting at this absolutist extreme of there's no free will. And what I keep coming back to is once you look at evolution and ecology and culture and what happened 1 second ago, all those pieces, show me a mechanism by which at some point you have a brain that just did something that is completely independent of its history. And if it even does that once, for my money, you've just proven there's free will. And I just wish somebody could show me mechanisms for how it works, because the ones that I have seen that invoke thermodynamics or chaoticism or quantum indeterminacy or things like that just don't seem to work for me. Second thing you raised, the notion of, say, even something as simple as saccadic movement of eyes. And that seems like we have a universe of difference between voluntarily, I am now going to look in this direction, versus involuntary fraction of a second once. And okay, voluntary, you're choosing where to look. You're choosing where to look because of the sort of person you wound up being, and thus what winds up being what you want to look at, what you don't want to look at, all of that. But even looking at things like involuntary eye movements, fascinating finding. You take people from collectivist cultures like Southeast Asia or individualist cultures from the United States and show them a complex picture where there's a bunch of things going on and a person looking in the center. And on the average, in a fraction of a second, the person from the individualist culture is going to look at the center of the picture, at the face of that person. And the person from the collectivist culture is first going to scan the periphery of the picture in a fraction of a second. Oh my God, whether your like ancestors grew rice or wheat has something to do with what you were doing with your eye muscles in under 1/10 of a second. The imprint of all of that is just everywhere you look. The final point you brought up is the totally great one for anyone who would sit there and say, oh, there's no free will because we can explain everything with genetics. No, we can't. Behavior genetics over and over and over shows that it is not a very well-developed science in a lot of ways. It's not terribly predictive. And yeah, you got two monozygotic twins, and one of them winds up being, Mother Teresa, and the other one winds up being Vladimir Putin or something. Yeah, they could turn out how can that be? They had the exact same genes. They had the exact same fetal environments, the exact same childhoods. They did not. One example. Okay, so you have monozygotic twins, identical twins. Depending on the time after fertilization that the eggs split, either they develop into, that's very strange. I have no idea what just happened. Very strange. Well, happy birthday, someone. Okay. At the time that the egg splits into two, depending on where it is in development by hours, either you develop one placenta with the two fetuses and one circulatory branch from the mother, or you split into two placentas with two separate circulatory branches. And if you wound up being a monochorionic identical twin versus a dichorionic identical twin, your mother has different levels of hormones, nutrients, all of that in these two different branches. These two twins are having different experiences in fetal life than the twin serving a single circulation. Oh, okay, yeah. Well, great, that's interesting, but that's like tiny. You look at adult identical twins, and identical twins who shared one maternal circulatory system have more similar IQs than identical twins that had two. So, no, identical twins, they're exactly the same from the moment they were like a fertilized egg. That was already different. It has already been shown that at the time of birth, identical twins already have different epigenetic traces in their immune system. You take white blood cells from them, and already they have different histories of epigenetic imprinting and such. Yeah, so it was exactly the same environment, but look how different they turned out. I think what we've been learning over and over and over is stuff that we say is such a tiny biological effect that it couldn't matter, or such a tiny environmental effect that it couldn't matter. Turns out they matter. Things we never would have thought mattered. Over and over, we have this lesson in biology of where we say, oh, I had no idea that had anything to do with it. The microbe makeup of my stomach influences my likelihood of a mental illness. Who knew that had anything? Over and over, all we're learning is, yeah, turned out that made a difference. That's part of the story also.
So, Eddie Namias, please.
Hi. I'll just get where you can see me so it's not weird. Thank you
Good,
for the
thank
talk. So I'm one of those compatibilists. And let me use an analogy to see if I can help explain what you and I are seeing differently. Because we basically agree on the scientific facts and the metaphysical facts. You're not really a determinist because you don't care if quantum effects occur. You just don't think that makes a difference. So what you are is a naturalist, and so am I. So our brains, our bodies, that's who we are. There's no soul. There's no extra thing. Descartes believed that there was one thing that mechanistic bodies couldn't do, or two things really, but they're related: reason and language. He thought that they were too indefinitely variable to be understood in mechanistic terms. That's why he didn't think animals had souls. He thought you needed a soul, something immaterial, something infinitely flexible to have language and reason. So you could imagine someone that was imbued with a Cartesian view of reason and language over the last 400 years doing a ton of neuroscience and biology, and recognizing that no, language and reason are actually these capacities that the brain allows in humans. But if they were imbued with a Cartesian view of a dualistic view of language and reason, they would have to then conclude that there's no language and reason. They don't really exist because there's no soul. It happens in a brain. That's the type of view that I think you're advancing. You're saying the only way you could have free will is if it was something that you couldn't explain in naturalistic terms. Whereas compatibilists would say, no, let's do the same thing with free will that we did with reason and language. We look to the prefrontal cortex, the thing that you did admit has some remarkable capacities for self-control, imagination of alternatives, and some level, if you're lucky and you don't have a 0 score or whatever the bad score is on the childhood upbringing, many people have a healthy enough prefrontal cortex that increasingly over time, they're able to exercise degrees of control over their behavior based on what they imagine in their future. And that's what free will is. It's not a magical ability of souls. We can naturalize it. So this is just, to kind of give you an analogy for a different way of concluding what happens when we understand that we are just naturalistic creatures with brains and we don't have souls. We have to explain whatever things we seem to be doing that we used to call free will, like self-control, not epileptic or witch things, but the things that the rest of us can do relatively well, like get to the airport on Friday because I plan my route properly, or get into grad school because I take various actions over time. Not with a miraculous soul power, but with a very naturalistic self-control power and imagination power. Does the analogy help?
Yes. Okay. What you're outlining, I think, has a flavor of what Dan Dennett has talked about within, and I will admit I am not a fan of Dan Dennett's, but what he has talked about, the notion that you could mature into having an adult capacity for responsibility, for culpability, for free will, all of that, exactly sort of the arc that you outlined there. So we look at some circumstance, we look at a circumstance where somebody has the opportunity to grow from something that has happened and incorporate new values and all of that, and thus change who they are, and they've just demonstrated free will. You get two teenage kids, and they've both just been arrested for trying to rob a liquor store or whatever, and they both are sent to jail for a year, and one of them comes out transformed by it, saying, this is not the sort of life I wanted. This isn't who I should be. I would like to be like this person. I always thought that person was cool. I'm going to be that way. And the other person comes out and says the exact same thing. But it turns out they have no self-discipline. The first time some temptation comes up, they fall into it again. They have, somebody who never misses an opportunity to miss an opportunity. And you say, wow, how'd they wind up as two such different people? And where did they get their role models from? Where did they get their, respect for self-reflection? Where did any of that? I was giving a talk a couple of months ago to a bunch of federal judges, which was very interesting, telling them there's no free will and telling them about the hungry judge phenomenon. And they found that sort of amusing and all of that. And one of the judges afterward said, yeah, that's great. I understand what the science is about, but let me tell you, I had a case last week where towards the end of the day, it was the last person I was ruling about, and we ran out of time, so picking up the next morning. And, at the end of the day, it was totally clear to me what I was going to do. This is simple, this is easy, this is straightforward. But then after dinner that night, I kind of found myself thinking about the case again. And I went back and I kind of looked at some of the records again. And I realized, wow, I had not really been appreciating this aspect of the case. And I changed my mind. I made a different decision the next morning. Are you telling me there was no free will there? And I said, no, there absolutely was no free will. How did you become the sort of person who after dinner would want to reflect back on that instead of watching television? How did you become the sort of person who would respect that thought process? How did you become the sort of person whose ego was secure enough that you could say, oh, I made a mistake, instead of saying, how do you become the sort of person who would do that? And at every one of those junctures where, there's a Cartesian moment where you can incorporate what's gone on around you and thus become a different person, it's a function of how you became a person at that moment. With Descartes, everybody yells at Descartes of inevitably animals have no souls, so they're just machines, and that's why they weren't like humans. And everyone says, oh, that's so wrong, making this false dichotomy between animals and humans. Animals have emotions, all of that. I look at it and I say, animals are just machines and humans are something special. And I say, oh, Descartes was totally wrong because we're machines also. We're biological machines just like anything else that's living. The only difference is we're the only species that can know that we're a biological machine. We're the only species that could learn where the buttons are and where the levers are and how you can manipulate somebody into being in a different sort of circumstance, so this button is pressed instead of that one. And other than that, we're as biological of a machine as an amoeba is. And simply that's where the difference is coming from.
Well, even if as a host, I have a question. So actually, I'll try to contend against your position by very different means than anyone else did so far. I want to see how much you ascribe causal powers to consciousness and to other mechanisms. I mean, I'm a complete materialist, a complete physicalist, complete naturalist. I don't believe in free will, but I believe that in the continuum of biology that you accepted, there are different levels of self-control. I mean, from lipid rafts to living beings, there are different levels of self-organization. But whenever you have like a bacillothermic being, it has less sophisticated tools of control than, for example, homeothermic being, a homeothermic animal. But I'll try to go to further up. This is a metaphor, further up in the nested hierarchies. For example, you cited one example of prejudice, racial prejudice. Kernighan and alumni had a paper in 2003, and they showed that photos of Afro-Americans and photos of white Americans were differently perceived if they were subliminal or consciously exposed. So if you show these pictures subliminally, the neurofibers in the amygdala are huge for the population is all white, right? The neurofibers in the amygdala are huge for the black photos, not that significant for the white photos. And you have a inversely correlated neurofiring in the frontal lobes. But if you show these pictures, like not just 30 milliseconds, but instead of that, something enough to be conscious, like half of a second, you have the inverse results. You have very strong neurofibers in the amygdala, still for the black photos, but not for the white photos, in inversely correlators in the frontal lobes. And this inversely correlation in the frontal lobes will diminish the production of energy in the amygdala, showing that if they are conscious, they are seeing these photos, they can repress their prejudice. I mean, I'm doing a shortcut, of course, here. But if this is not shown consciously or with the necessary time for become conscious, we don't have this factor. So it seems that being conscious plays a causal role in the way you behave. So maybe beings that have semantic loaded consciousness are much more capable of controlling themselves than those that are not capable of it. And if we have absolutely opposite and different results with subliminal thresholds and conscious thresholds, it seems that consciousness makes a difference and plays a causal role here. So what I'm trying to account for is the idea that being conscious makes a difference. Let me give another example. A person that is part of this committee, Adina Roskis, that usually attend our talks, published with Michael Shadlin something about policies. For example, if you are a person that suffers from alcohol abuse syndrome, for example, and you adopt a policy of having zero alcohol in your home, and you have a bar that the subway station, we can go to your house by 2 ways, and you adopt the policy, never pass through the door of the bar, maybe you're diminishing the possibility of, falling into having alcohol again. So maybe adopting policies is something that we can control, and that will give a little bit more room of not, to use a term that we're using here, is a metaphor from tennis, the enforced errors. So adopting some policies can be a way to avoid unforced errors. So I'd like to see what is your take into those two subjects: adopting preventive policies as something that we can decide based on reasoning, and the capability of consciousness of controlling unwanted behavior.
Good. Okay, first off, I have to admit, I am terrified of the subject of consciousness because I simply do not understand what the neurobiologists are reporting on it. About every 10 years, I force myself to read a review on what's new in that area, and I still don't understand what's going on. So I usually panic when consciousness comes up as an issue. I think what we see is, some of our behavior is mediated by consciousness. Some of it is rationalized post hoc by consciousness. That's part of the picture. And from my perspective, somehow that's not a terribly relevant part of the story, because whether it's a consciously chosen act or an unconscious one, nonetheless, what you chose reflects who you wound up being. In terms of the point that you raised, though, the immediacy, if I walk down this block right by the bar versus if I walk this other way, if I can't resist the bar, yet we can choose up at the corner there to take this route instead of that route. What we see is a hierarchy of emotional immediacy. You take someone, for example, with damage to the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, and this is someone who has a lot of trouble inhibiting their impulsive behavior. And what you see is they give wonderful advice to other people. They say, you know what? Don't go for that easy option. Do a little bit extra work because you're going to get a lot more of a reward. Show some self-discipline. And if it's a very easy setting, they could do it themselves. But right when the reward is right in front of their faces, they can even tell you, I'm going to do the harder thing because there's going to be more of a reward. I know how this works here. And then they go for the wrong one. And what you see is levels of sort of volitional control there vary as a function of the moment, the immediacy, the emotional content. We make very different decisions about whose life we would sacrifice, depending on if they are an us or a them. All of that. So the ability to exercise control and walk home by the block that does not pass the bar is a very different task of self-control than walking down the block with the bar and walking right past it.
Okay.
I think in terms of prefrontal cortex, I think what we're seeing here is another sort of dichotomy that people fall into. You take somebody who has massive damage to their frontal cortex and their behavior is completely abnormal. And as I've experienced with the American legal system, about half of juries will decide, okay, this is a mitigating factor, this matters. And in those cases where they say, yeah, this is a broken machine. And that's easy for them because here's the singular explanation for why this person did what they did, their frontal damage, and it's easy to see there's a massive cable connecting that event with what the person has done. And that's an edge case. That's a good liberal stance who would say, yeah, remember, if there's brain damage, that's like all bets are off. And the issue is, it is so much harder instead for somebody to sit there and instead of saying, here is the single cause, to recognize a million different spider webs of causality tracing back to a million years to 1 second ago, spider webs that half of them, you don't even know they exist. Whoever heard this has something to do with this, where it is inconceivable that you put all those spider webs together, and that's going to be as powerful of a cable as the single thing from the brain damage. It's just easier for us to see, that's why this person did not have free will. It's simply a much harder task to put all those spider webs together.
Yeah, sure. I completely agree that, just fast follow-up, I completely agree that people that are not highly educated in science will have much more of an ease with proximal causes than distal causes, and like to isolating one cause instead of very intervening causes in a crazy complex array. But you just gave an example of someone that has, any problem in the frontal lobes. Would you say that the person that have problems in the frontal lobes it doesn't matter what kind of problem this person has, will have the same capacity of someone that is neurotypical? Because that's what I'm trying to account for, the levels of responsibility based on levels of capacity, of information processing capacity. Would you equalize these people? They are equally determined, or there are levels of determination in your account?
No, they are very different people in that regard, because whatever's going on in their frontal cortex is in the context of everything else that happened. I worked on a case a few years ago of a guy who had massive frontal damage from a car accident when he was young, all of that, and he had just committed his 8th and 9th murders. And then I was reading about a case of another person with the same exact amount of frontal damage. And what did this person do when they all got together for Christmas dinner with the family? If they didn't like the dinner, they would say, "This is terrible. I hate this. This is your terrible cook." Wow, same damage. One of them becomes a very rude house guest, and the other is a multiple murderer. Whoa, same brain damage. No, it's not the same. What do you know? The guy who became the terrible Christmas dinner guest had a stable middle-class upbringing, was loved by his parents, had all sorts of financial, and you just see, one single piece of the story where you see radically different outcomes. You say, oh, that was not deterministic then. We're seeing choice. We're seeing free will. No. We're just not seeing all the other variables that became relevant there.
Great. Thank you very much for your talk, Robert. I have one question related to the normative side of your argument. So you mentioned at some points that we can, in fact, it's more about the possibility part of your argument. But when you mentioned at some points that we can, for example, put people in jail, and not only that, we should put criminals in jail, right? When they commit crimes, and in order to protect society, right? In these cases, if we can say that we can put them in jail, in your view, if there is no free will, how do we make of the term can in this case, right? Like we can put criminals in jails and so on, but they don't have free will, and we don't have free will to put them in jail at the same time. So I'm not sure if it's clear enough. If it's not clear enough, then please let me know. So how are we to understand the term can in these sentences, if I understand you correctly? Maybe I didn't. So.
Oh boy, how to tell that I'm with an auditorium full of philosophers if we're now discussing
yeah, sorry for the
significance of can.
Yeah.
The
meaning, what you mean by can, that's more about that in that sense.
Well, I think, in a sense, that one's a red herring, in that if you take, this craziness I'm talking about here to its logical conclusion, there will be no prisons. It doesn't make any sense. Yet we're not going to have dangerous people running around in the street. You're going to have quarantine models exactly as, 4 years ago. You get a bad case of COVID and you're supposed to quarantine. It is not a moral judgment, all of that. In this model, any way in which we're thinking, how do we make a criminal justice system compatible with it? There is no criminal justice system. There is no justice. There is no justice served. The notion of forgiveness or not forgiveness is irrelevant in all these cases. And yeah, I know we're not about to pull this off tomorrow, but again, we don't burn people at the stakes anymore. We've made progress. We got to keep pushing this.
So, Robert, thank you. This is Thomas. I'm on Team Skeptic as well. So, in this sense, I'm a sympathetic listener. But I'm in one ways in a strange position within the skeptical framework, because I actually think that the focus you guys have on punishment, the anti-punishment sentiment, actually makes the view far less plausible. And I don't think getting rid of punishment in the way you suggest is even a good idea. You have to get rid of some things. It's true. They're not going to deserve in some deep sense, just like children may not deserve in some deep sense, but I still have to use negative reinforcement. I still have to use punishment contingencies. I still have to use positive reinforcement. So we have a number of things we can do using these kinds of contingencies to help kids and adults and everybody else. And so I don't know why there's not room for a kind of punishment as a kind of re-education and rehab. I mean, so there's going to be, I think there's room for there's room for all these things. There's room for a kind of accountability. There's room for a kind of holding people accountable to society's norms. People have to be trained. People have to be reintegrated. All that stuff may require something that it may not look like the punishment we currently have. So, I mean, if you want to call it not a criminal justice system, but it won't just be quarantine. I mean, part of it is we know in quarantine, we quarantine people when we have treatments. So it's already not the best sort of analog, because we don't have anything like that for some of these conditions. Some of these problems you're identifying, like frontal lobe damage. So what is the treatment for that? Nothing. You're going to quarantine them forever on this model. So I think that like the quarantine it's a danger. It's dangerous if that's the only frame. So it's not that I don't think there's room for something like quarantine, because there will be. Maybe psychopaths should be quarantined. But for garden variety criminals, maybe the quarantine model doesn't make as much sense. Maybe some form of punishment. So I guess if there's something that's not the anti-punishment thing that's still a skeptical view, I think people wouldn't find it so counterintuitive. Now, I may just be wrong, of course, about the punishment part.
Good. I actually completely agree with you, and I'm kicking myself because I always forget to say, or at least saying, we got to get rid of blame and punishment as virtues in and of themselves, and get rid of reward and praise as virtues in and of themselves. I absolutely agree. They retain powerful instrumental value, and both should be retained there, with the caveats that often we mistake thinking that we are seeing efficacy with punishment with the fact that we like to punish. Often, all of those things. So be very, very prudent in deciding that you have an effective instrumental tool there. But no, absolutely, I completely agree with you. I was not for a second suggesting that. So those absolutely should be retained for their instrumental value.
Okay, last question.
This is not a philosophical question. This is just a question about how you feel personally about the possibility that your view is spreading despair in the world. There are a number of people who are, well, I'd say in the low hundreds, people who have written me about, how they were on the verge of suicide, or that they felt utter despair at the possibility or the likelihood that they were nothing but biochemical puppets because they had read people like Sam Harris or somebody, and that when they heard a reasonable argument for the possibility of something worthy of the name of volitional control, or free will in a naturalistic sense, that was a great relief to them. And I worry sincerely that your view is actually as well intentioned as you think it is, like freeing the world from blameworthiness, is in fact spreading despair among many people.
That's clearly a major, major worry. As I noted, I stopped believing in free will when I was 14, and this is exactly stuff I've been wrestling with ever since. But it has struck me, okay, there's two versions of the despair. The easy version is despairing that, I didn't really deserve my very impressive university degree. I didn't deserve my great salary. I didn't deserve being CEO of my company, any version of that. I didn't deserve being loved. I didn't deserve people thinking I'm kind, any of those things. And in those cases, what I've arrived at is, if that is depressing you, you're one of the lucky ones, because you're someone for whom life has been treating you better than average for reasons you had no control over, and for the vast numbers of people who've been treated worse for reasons they had no control over. They're not sitting around saying, oh my God, what does it mean that I didn't earn my master's degree really in my own efforts? What does it mean that I was born poor and stayed poor? What does it mean that I'm morbidly obese no matter how much I try? What does it mean that I have an off-putting personality because I'm on the autism spectrum? All of those, I think for the majority of people, this is liberating. And if you're bummed out about how you didn't really deserve your salary, it means you're one of the lucky humans. And it probably means you haven't even occurred to you that you're one of the lucky humans who has clean drinking water and things of that sort. Okay, that one I see as being easy. Yeah, the more fundamental one is the one you bring up. Damn, we're just a bunch of molecules that come together temporarily, and each of us calls that me, and it's a vast indifferent universe, and that's a pretty challenging one. I sure as hell cannot give advice on meaning in life. I get my meaning out of loving my wife and family. I get my meaning out of it's nice solving scientific puzzles, whatever. But yeah, at the end of the day, we are just biological machines, but there's a critical piece to it. We're the weirdest biological machines out there in that we're machines that can feel pain. And no matter how crazy and irrational it seems to say that something good or bad can happen to a machine, it's a good thing when there's less pain. I mean, that's the only meaning I can pull out of this. And I suspect lots of you could rip that to shreds on logical and philosophical grounds. And I'm sure various dead white male philosophers are rolling over in their graves because that's not logically airtight. That, in fact, has all. That's all I can come up with at the end.
Thank you, Robert. It's been a pleasure.
Well, proprioception, yeah. Okay, Robert, that was terrific. We squeezed you like a ripe orange for 40 minutes. We have to liberate the theater. It's time to close. I just want to thank you for the willingness and the ability to respond so many questions, for the chivalry. A big round of applause for Robert Sapolsky.
Well, thank you. Again, I wish I could be there. If nothing else, it would be fun to now go get something to eat and sit around a big table and all of us talk lots more about this
That's
stuff.
exactly what we're going to do now. Thanks a lot.
Have fun. I'm there in spirit.
Okay.
Good. Thanks.